This show is brought to you by Equality New Mexico's Maegan Carberry, that's me, your host, and Layla Garcia, who is our producer. The Built by Us podcast explores New Mexico news events from a queer and trans perspective as part of a broader effort to create a government and systems that represent our needs. Today, we welcome Representative Angelica Rubio of District 35 in Doña Ana County. She is the perfect guest to talk with us about how we can prioritize sustainability in New Mexico, even as we increasingly confront dangerous and extractive efforts like Project Jupiter. That's the data center that's being built down south that will impact the communities that she represents. Welcome to Built by Us.
No, thanks, Maegan. I'm good. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you. I am sure that many of our listeners are familiar with you and your service, but let's help them get to know you a little bit better. You were raised in rural New Mexico as the youngest daughter of Mexican immigrants. After college at New Mexico State and a master's degree in Los Angeles, you spent some time in Washington, D.C. You developed a passion for racial and social justice, and you felt compelled to return home to southern New Mexico, where you've been working as an organizer ever since. So tell us a little bit about that journey and what you're working on these days.
Yeah, no, thanks for that introduction. I feel like I've had a lot of just lived experience in terms of just my work as an organizer. And I feel like so much of what I've learned over the last 20 years has really impacted my work. But I feel like the majority of where I stand on a lot of issues and what drives me in the legislature specifically is just having grown up in Lake Arthur, which is the town that I grew up in. My parents immigrated and settled in the Pecos Valley like over 60 years ago. And I think for the way that community, Lake Arthur and the surrounding areas in the Permian Basin, the way that they've just been impacted, I think has really just enhanced sort of my values and how I lead. And so I've spent a lot of my career told that like our land and our water and our future are always available for extraction by whoever is in power. And so I think that as I've been serving in the legislature and just seeing how extractive industries specifically have impacted our communities and how they just take what they want and then leave our state and have our community sort of like take hold of that is just something that has sort of defined my career over the course of the last 10 years serving in the legislature, but really just a long time of 20 years in organizing spaces.
Yeah. Maybe you could also define for us how an extractive industry kind of operates here. What does it look like? What are they doing historically? And
yeah,
maybe
so it's a great question. For me, I see extractive industries is like oil and gas, private prisons, nuclear waste. We have a long legacy in both the private prison industry as well as the nuclear piece, along with oil and gas. And then, of course, now this issue that we're facing with AI data centers. And what I like to remind people about is that while the industries change, the logic always remains the same. We're just constantly perpetuating this cycle that is very exploitative and very destructive. And so it leaves our communities unable to really like push back, because even just now with some of the issues that we're finding with data centers, they're moving so quickly that it's hard to mobilize and organize communities to be able to fight back. I mean, we've been successful in places where I'm really excited to talk about with you on that, but the speed in which these extractive industries come in, and then they just completely dismantle so much of our communities, our families, our water, our air, and our land. And then we subsidize them to do that, and then they just leave. And so a lot of our communities are having to fit the bill years and decades later. And so, and that bill includes the cost of these subsidies, but also the legacy of what these industries leave behind, which is so many things that are harmful to not only public health, but also to our climate and to our water.
And you mentioned the data centers. It seems like you read in the news, whether it's nationally or here in New Mexico, you're reading about a new data center project every day. And this politician says it's going to increase jobs. And, then it's like, oh, we're against it, get rid of it. And it seems like a lot of people are kind of figuring out what their positions are on the data centers right now. Specifically, like the rest of the country, New Mexico is seeing an uptick in, like the Project Jupiter effort that's happening down south, where you live and where you represent the people in the community, where that would happen. They've seen expedited processes. You mentioned that. On top of the expedited processes, the owners of these data centers have utilized their massive budgets to spread like misleading digital information campaigns that kind of frame the data centers as eco-friendly or community supportive economic projects while ignoring the environmental and community aspects. I think they also announced recently, that they were trying to do it in a way that uses less water or doesn't pollute the air as much with like a single microgrid or something. And it's not just the data centers. Recently, plans were announced for Blackstone, a massive private equity firm, to buy out PNM, which is responsible for New Mexico's electric utilities. And Blackstone has historically been tied to like skyrocketed utility rates and negative environmental impacts. So why do you think it is that we're seeing such a spike in these exploitive industries in New Mexico? I mean, you've mentioned it's always happened. The logic is the same every time. What's going on like right now?
Yeah, I get really I think I've been very frustrated in in the 10 years that I've been serving in the legislature because of just the lack of courage that Democrats have specifically. And I feel like a lot of Democrats, especially corporate Dems, are leading the charge on allowing for these data centers to sort of take over. And it's not just here in New Mexico, even though we're experiencing that with our legislative leaders here in southern New Mexico, but we see it in places around the state, around the country. I was just on a call with a legislator from Maine who was the architect for a moratorium to pause the development of data centers in the state of Maine, and built this coalition, managed to get it through the legislature, and the Democratic governor ended up vetoing the bill. And so I think that while a lot of people talk about how the federal government and the administration has actively used emergency powers to fast track a lot of these extractive infrastructure before communities have any opportunity to organize against them, it's been with the help of Democrats. And I think that has been very, very scary to me, is that we're that in this moment that some of our own leaders have also thrown us under the bus because of the fact that it goes back to that perpetuating that cycle of very exploitative and destructive industries, is that rather than working with communities and trying to figure out what's best for our communities, a lot of our leaders just look at the big shiny things because it's either it addresses an election year or whatever. Like they're not thinking about long term. They're only thinking about 2 to 4 years ahead. And that has been, I think, the biggest frustration with this issue, with communities unable to be able to organize. I mean, I think with Project Jupiter, which is the massive data center that's here in Santa Teresa, which was approved by the Doña Ana County Commission last September, the movement for Project Jupiter was happening well before the Doña Ana County Commission was even a part of the conversation. It was being led secretly, in my opinion, by legislators, because we were hearing legislation during the February legislative session in 2025, but we didn't know that it was about Project Jupiter. We were just hearing about these bills that were leading to something that seemed very not something that we were expecting. And so I think it kind of gradually happened throughout the state, but it was done here in New Mexico without much of transparency, and it went on to the commission in that same way. And now you're seeing so many local leaders now demanding guardrails for this project, when we've just given away a $165 billion IRB to this corporation, and really at the expense of our communities.
Maybe you can talk a little bit just about what the expected impact of Project Jupiter is, and what people are saying is the upside of it versus what you perceive as what's really going on.
Yeah, absolutely. So with Project Jupiter, as I mentioned, the Doña Ana County Commission approved it last September, and there was only one person who opposed this $165 billion IRB. And I will say that when the county received this proposal and voted on it, there was still the application was still very much incomplete. There was pages that were left blank. There were things that were just marked as drafts, and this was all in under 2 weeks. And so there wasn't a lot of information. And so even though our communities were able to mobilize, and they all mobilized really, really fast, our commission still, after hours of debate and hearing public comment opposed to this project, they still went ahead and passed it. And so what we've learned since the vote in September is that in terms of water, the data center here in southern New Mexico, which I don't need to remind people is the desert, like we barely even see the Rio Grande flow down here in the south. Like those are a lot of the issues that we have, a lot of water issues here in southern New Mexico, but Project Jupiter is going to need nearly 1 million gallons of water a day. And so that is just to cool the data. That's just to cool the equipment that stores so much of our data. And then to uphold the actual grid that's going to power up these data centers. The original emissions that were projected after the vote was that it would be equivalent to the pollution that Las Cruces and Albuquerque have combined. And if I mean, you're from Los Angeles, I used to live there, and I know how many cars go through Los Angeles, but that's the equivalent of here in New Mexico with this data center. It would be an equivalent of about 3 million cars every year. And so I think the developers recently announced a switch to this thing called fuel cell technology, which is still
Yeah.
not clear what that is. It's never really been like in the way that they're massively thinking about it. It hasn't really been tried or proven to be successful. So again, New Mexico is sort of like this is the sacrifice zone once again
Right.
to
Yeah.
test something out. And so I think that that switch to that technology was part of the big organizing push that was happening statewide, where you had thousands of people doing public comment around the air quality application that they had applied for to the New Mexico Environmental Department. And once I think they knew that NMED was under the pressure of having to maybe deny it, that's when they decided to switch over to this fuel cell technology to sort of get under from the air permit scrutiny. But
Okay.
but I will let you all know that they're also simultaneously racing to build a gas pipeline through our public lands. And that is being done because of the federal government's intervention. Our state land commissioner, Stephanie Garcia Richard, tried really hard to stop it from her position as a state land commissioner and through state lands. But the Trump administration, in a process that usually takes years for an environmental review, took 14 days to approve it. And so they're just kind of just steamrolling while the rest of us are just trying to mobilize
Yeah.
and
What's the
organize around
rush? What's
this.
the rush? The political conditions are conducive to, hammering it through.
I mean, I think speed is the strategy. It's when you move fast, you outrun the community's ability to organize. And so
Hmm.
that is what I think is happening, is that you have this huge corporation with a lot of money to be able to just rush it through. And I think that our local leaders are now trying to set up these guardrails because now they're concerned. But what they are asking for now is what we were demanding prior to the vote. And so I think there's just a lot of frustration around what's happening with the data center here in Doña Ana County. But I think that there's also been a lot of learning in supporting the organizing that's happening in the work up north with PNM and Blackstone. But also, if you've been following Socorro County, they're also actively working right now to stop another data center from being built in their county. So I think what the learnings that's come out of Project Jupiter here in Doña Ana County is really helping to amplify sort of the organizing and mobilization push that's happening in other places around the state to ensure that if Project Jupiter moves forward, that at least we can figure out how to stop it from happening in other places.
And speaking of other projects, we had also been talking a little bit about the Blackstone acquisition of PNM. Perhaps you could talk a little bit about how that's expected to impact New Mexicans.
Yeah, I mean, I want to also start a little bit with some context because I think people don't know how we get our electricity and how it
Hmm.
travels through our grid. And so, when you flip on a light switch, that electricity has traveled from a massive system of power plants, transmission lines, and local infrastructure that gets powered from where it's generated and into our homes. And here in New Mexico, PNM operates most of that grid for the northern and central part of the state, and they're a regulated monopoly. So you can't choose a different electricity provider the way that you can choose a different phone plan. Like you can't just say, "Oh, I'm going to leave Verizon and go to T-Mobile." You have to pay PNM or you don't have any power. And because they're a monopoly, they're regulated by the Public Regulation Commission, which is the PRC. And they are the ones that are supposed to make sure that they're charging fair rates and making decisions in the public interest. And so PNM is, because they're a public utility, most New Mexicans have no choice but to use them. And so Blackstone is one of the largest private equity firms in the world. And now they want to buy PNM for, I think the number is now at $11.5 billion. And they want to own, so they not only are going to pay that, but they billions, it's an obscene amount of money, but they're one of the biggest data center developers in the country. And so they want to own the grid that powers the data centers that they're building. And when they do that, New Mexicans will be the ones that will have to pay the bills. And so we've seen it in places like Virginia, in Texas, and in Georgia, where utility rates have spiked when data center demands have exploded, because they will. And that's what we're seeing. And so the PRC needs to be like, they need to work really hard to reject the steal. And so Blackstone in this case is not only just the builder, they're also the lender, the supplier, and potentially the customer. And so that's like this vertical monopoly, and it's a really scary thing. And so I think that's where the organizing and the mobilization has been so powerful in this space, because I mean, I haven't been there in person, but I've been able to just see from folks who have been participating in a lot of these efforts is that the community has really come out in support of pushing the PRC to stop this. And so I think that's what we need to continue to urge communities to move forward in pushing back.
But, we talked about expedited efforts, and was there really community input? Is it just going ahead? Is there anything that can be done to stop this that's in motion at this point?
I mean, I think that there's a lot of efforts right now to use sort of like the legal system to to
Hmm.
to stop it from happening. I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not able to like share what those technicalities could be, but I think there are still folks from on the legal side who are trying to figure out if there's a way to at least slow it down from happening. I know that we started interim committees in the legislature, and there are several legislators who are also working on legislation to see how to keep this from moving forward. I know for myself, Representative Eleanor Chavez and Representative Micaela Cadena are also working on legislation around a moratorium for data centers, but I'm also thinking of something much broader too. And so I think because our legislature only meets once every year for such a
Yeah.
short period of time, it makes it challenging to get to have any power when I mean, our governor supported the data center here in southern New Mexico. And so I'm not really sure where her stance is with Blackstone, but knowing the situation with Project Jupiter, I just I don't know where a lot of our leaders stand on some of these issues to actually work towards
Right.
stopping it.
And it's an election year. It could look different. in the future. Well, it's a 60-day session next year, right? So it's a little more time.
Yes, and we'll
Yeah.
have a new governor, and yeah, and then for sure the House and the Senate. Well, just the House will look different for sure.
Yeah. If speed is the strategy, like you were saying, what do you think is a way of getting community involvement, actively responsive, fast enough to, keep pace with what's going on?
That's a really great question. I mean, I think that from us, I think Socorro County, I think, is a really good example of how well folks have mobilized. I mean, Socorro is a very rural county, and there's a lot of self-interest there. I mean, there's a lot of people who are saying we don't have water for something like this, or folks who are working for the university who are saying like we already have a very great academic institution here. Why would we want to like move in this direction? There's all these differing self-interests that are all coming together for one reason, and that is this data center is not welcomed in Socorro County. And I think that that is how organizing needs to continue to work when it comes to these issues around data centers, but also when we're talking about other extractive industries.
Today's conversation reminds us that the fight over extractive industries in New Mexico is really a fight over who gets to shape the future of our communities, from the massive data centers like Project Jupiter to corporate attempts to control public utilities. These decisions affect the water, the energy, environment, and long-term quality of life. Representative Rubio has helped us understand why community input, transparency, and sustainability matter, especially for communities that are too often excluded from these conversations. So thank you so much for being here. From Equality New Mexico, thank you for listening to Built by Us.